A teenage violinist was stopped at the gate over nothing more than a look. No shouting, no rules broken, just one VIP feeling uncomfortable. In seconds, she became a security concern. What the airport didn't realize was that this wasn't just a girl they were questioning. It was the moment their entire system would be tested. Phoenix Sky Harbor was doing what it always does in the late afternoon, blowing cold air that never quite wins against the desert heat, fluorescent lights that make everyone look tired. A constant hum of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and people pretending they're not stressed. Lena Brooks didn't pretend. She sat upright at gate C-17 like she was holding a note in her chest and refusing to let it shake. 17. Slim shoulders, box braids pulled back clean. No jewelry that caught attention. No designer anything. Just black jeans, a faded hoodie, and sneakers that had seen too many rehearsals. Beside her was the case. Not big, not dramatic, but heavy in the way that matters. The kind of weight you carry carefully because it isn't just wood and strings. It's history. It's the last thing someone left you. Inside was Aurora, her violin. It had belonged to her mother, and that fact alone changed the way Lena touched the handle. Like she was touching a memory. Like she was touching a promise. In less than 24 hours, Lena was supposed to stand in a small room in Los Angeles and play for people who rarely look up from their clipboards unless you give them a reason to. A conservatory audition. A scholarship slot. The kind that could rewrite an entire life if you earned it. She wasn't going there for fun. Most kids her age were worried about who texted back. Lena was worried about finger placement, tempo, breath. She had spent her whole year counting beats and counting dollars. Lessons, competitions, coaches, flights. And she had done what her father taught her to do. Be early. Be prepared. Give no one an excuse. So she had the paperwork, not just on her phone, printed, highlighted, a neat folder in her backpack with her name on it in clean black ink. Confirmation from Aero West Special Services, a baggage tag for the instrument, a QR code for the accommodation note. The kind of documentation people love, right up until they've already decided what they think you are. Lena checked the time again, then checked the folder again, even though she already knew it was there. She could hear her father's voice in her head, calm and firm, like it always was. Don't argue with feelings, argue with facts. But Lena also knew another truth, one she didn't say out loud, because saying it made it real. Facts don't always matter at the gate. At the gate, what matters is who looks like trouble. Lena watched the pre-boarding line form. First came the familiar cast, the frequent flyers with headphones and posture, the couples who moved like the airport belonged to them, the men in quarter-zip sweaters who spoke into their phones like they were negotiating peace treaties. Then came the VIP. Diane Harper, late 50s, perfect blowout. A white blouse that stayed crisp like it had never met a real day of work. A leather carry-on that probably cost more than Lena's entire flight. Diane glanced down the line as if she was auditing the room. Her eyes moved over Lena like a scanner. Braids, hoodie, instrument case. And then the look landed. Not anger, not fear exactly. More like irritation. Like Lena was a smudge on glass. Lena felt it. That familiar pressure behind the ribs. The one that says, don't react. Don't give them anything. Because Lena had learned early that people don't need proof to decide you're a problem. They just need a feeling. And feelings, somehow, become policy when the right person has them. The boarding announcement crackled. Now boarding Aero West Flight 208 to Los Angeles.
We welcome our priority passengers, our premium cabin guests.
Lena stood, carefully lifted Aurora by the handle, slid the folder out, ready. She approached the gate podium, where a tired-looking agent was tapping at a keyboard like it had personally wronged him. He didn't look up right away. He just said, "Boarding pass?" Lena handed it over. "Hi, I have an instrument accommodation. Special Services confirmed it. It's supposed to be stored in the forward cabin compartment. I have the—" "I'll see it," he cut in, still not looking at her. Flat voice, short fuse. Lena opened the folder, smooth motion, no shaking hands. She pointed to the line that mattered, the QR code, the authorization note. Everything clean, everything correct. The agent finally glanced, not at the paper, at her. Then he scanned the code. A beep. Then another beep. A red flash on his screen. His eyebrows pinched like the machine had accused him of something. Lena's stomach dropped just a little. "What does it say?" she asked softly. "It says, 'Instrument needs a purchased seat,'" he muttered, like he was reading from the sky. "You can't bring this up front." Lena blinked. "That's not right. I confirmed this. It's in my file. They told me to pre-board so it can be secured." Behind her, Diane Harper made a small sound, a tiny laugh that didn't need words. The agent glanced past Lena to the priority line, where Diane stood with an expression that said, "Why is this taking so long?" And in that moment, Lena understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't a question of policy. This was a question of convenience. And she was the inconvenient one. Lena kept her voice even. "Could you check the note again? It's attached to my reservation. It's the only way the instrument can fly safely." The agent sighed, loud enough to be heard, like she was asking for the moon. "Step aside," he said. "You're holding up the line." It was a small sentence, but it carried a bigger meaning. Not now. Not you. Not here. Lena stepped to the side, still holding Aurora like a shield, and the line flowed around her like she wasn't even there. The first thing that changed was the sound. The steady rhythm of boarding announcements kept going, like nothing had happened. The line kept moving. The airport kept breathing. But around Lena, the space went quiet in a different way. A heavier way. Like a room where everyone knows something is wrong, but no one wants to say it out loud. "Step aside, please," the gate agent repeated. Not angry, not loud, just firm enough to end the conversation. Lena didn't argue. She shifted to the wall, still holding Aurora, still gripping her folder like it could speak for her if she didn't. She stood there while the line flowed past her, suitcases rolling, shoes clicking, people stepping around her like she was a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong spot. Some people glanced, a few slowed down, most didn't. One man looked at her papers, then at her face, then away. A woman adjusted her headphones and stared straight ahead. A couple whispered something and moved faster. No one asked what was happening. No one said, "Is everything okay?" It wasn't cruelty. It was something quieter. It was permission. Because the moment no one interrupts, the moment no one questions it, the moment no one risks being uncomfortable, the system decides it was right. Lena felt her ears burn, not from anger, from exposure, from being visible in the worst way, like standing on a stage without knowing your lines. The gate agent leaned toward a supervisor and spoke in a low voice. Words like instrument, non-compliant, and policy floated through the air. Technical words, safe words, words that turn a person into a problem. The supervisor nodded without looking at Lena. And just like that, the narrative was sealed. She wasn't a student anymore. She wasn't a musician. She was a delay. She was an inconvenience. She was something that needed to be moved out of the way so boarding could continue smoothly. That's when the walk started. Not dramatic, not escorted yet, just guided, redirected. A small step away from the gate that felt like a mile. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because she was scared, but because she understood what was happening. This wasn't about rules. This was about comfort. And her presence had made someone important uncomfortable. That was enough. There is a moment in situations like this that is more powerful than shouting. It's the moment everyone chooses silence. No one raised their voice. No one protested. No one stood between a 17-year-old girl and the system that had decided she was trouble. Only lowered eyes, pretend phone calls, hands tightening around coffee cups like they were suddenly very busy. That silence wasn't confusion. It was calculation. People knew something was off. They could feel it. But they also knew something else. Speaking up meant risk. Risk of delay. Risk of attention. Risk of being pulled into a story they didn't want to be part of. So they chose safety. They chose distance. They chose to let one person carry the weight so they wouldn't have to. And that's how injustice usually survives. Not because it's loud, but because it's allowed. We like to believe harm only comes from people who are openly cruel. But most harm is supported by people who are quietly afraid. Afraid of being singled out. Afraid of being that person. Afraid of making things complicated. So they stay still. And staying still becomes a decision. The saddest part wasn't that Lena was being stopped. The saddest part was that an entire gate of people had just agreed, without speaking, that her dignity was less important than their convenience. That they were willing to let something wrong happen, as long as it wasn't happening to them. Lena felt her throat tighten. Not because she was about to cry, but because she was trying not to. She kept her chin level. She kept her shoulders straight. She remembered her father's rule. Control what you can control. So she controlled her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She could feel eyes on her back, some curious, some uncomfortable, some relieved it wasn't them. The gate agent picked up the phone. "I need a supervisor at C-17. Those words hit harder than any accusation. Because once supervisors get involved, stories stop being flexible. They become official. A woman in a navy blazer approached, clipboard, tight smile, authority that lived in posture more than volume. "What seems to be the issue?" "She has an instrument," the agent said. "No purchased seat." Lena lifted the folder. "I have authorization. It's in the system. Special Services confirmed it." The supervisor didn't take the folder. She looked at Lena first, then at Aurora, then at Diane Harper, standing a few feet away, arms crossed, lips pressed together in something close to satisfaction. That was all the data she needed. "We need to keep the boarding process moving," the supervisor said. "We can resolve this after the plane departs." After. The word that always means never. Lena swallowed. "I have an audition." The supervisor nodded like she'd heard a weather report. "We'll do what we can." But her tone said something else. "This isn't urgent to me. This is urgent to you. And those two things are not the same." The crowd shifted again. Someone behind Lena whispered, "That's messed up." But not loud enough to matter. Lena felt something break open inside her chest. Not rage, not panic. Understanding. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And everyone watching was participating by doing nothing. That was when the walk truly became a walk of shame. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because being treated like a problem in public changes the way the air feels, changes the way your body stands, changes how much space you think you're allowed to take. She moved away from the gate, and the boarding line closed behind her like a door. Lena stood there for almost 30 seconds before she moved, not because she didn't know what to do, but because part of her still hoped someone would say something, anything. No one did. So she turned slightly away from the gate, pulled her phone from her pocket, and scrolled to the contact she had never wanted to use in a moment like this. Dad. Not because he was powerful, because he was calm. When he picked up, his voice didn't rush. It never did. "Hey, Lena, you boarded?" She swallowed once. "Not yet." Silence. Just long enough for him to hear the difference. "Tell me what's happening." "They won't let Aurora on," she said. "They're saying I need a seat for her. But I have the authorization. It's in the system." I showed them. They didn't even read it. "Where are you?" "Gate C-17. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Are you being yelled at?" "No." "Good. Stay exactly where you are." She didn't hear anger. She heard calculation. He didn't ask for names. He didn't ask what she had said. He didn't ask her to argue. He ended the call with 4 words. "I'll take it." And the line went dead. Back at gate C-17, the boarding process was almost finished. Final passengers were stepping through. The jet bridge door stood open like a mouth closing. The supervisor was checking her watch. The gate agent was already reaching for the keyboard to mark Lena as no-show. That was when the first phone rang. Not Lena's, the supervisor's. She looked annoyed at first, then confused, then careful. "Yes, this is C-17. Yes, I understand. No, she's still here." "I see." Her posture changed. Not dramatic, just enough. She turned toward the agent. "Don't close anything yet." The agent frowned. "We're behind schedule." I said, "Don't close anything." The gate area felt different immediately, like a breeze before a storm. Within seconds, the station director's phone rang, then the duty manager's, then operations. The language shifted, from casual to precise, from dismissive to alert. "Who is it?" one agent whispered. The supervisor shook her head. "I don't know yet." But she was already lying. Because you can feel when a call doesn't come from the bottom. You can feel when it comes from above. Across the tarmac, on the far western edge of Phoenix Sky Harbor, a sleek white aircraft was rolling toward a secondary taxi lane that almost never saw traffic during peak hours. Its tail number had already been flagged, its clearance had already been logged, and its pilot had already been told to hold position. Not at a gate, not at a hangar, at taxiway Echo, the road no one wanted blocked. Inside the control tower, someone leaned closer to their monitor. Why is that jet stopping there? Because it was instructed to. By who? There was a pause, then, by someone who outranks us. Back at gate C-17, the gate agent's screen froze for a second. A soft buzz, then another. His face changed. The kind of change you only see when people realize they are no longer in charge. The supervisor's phone rang again. This time she stepped away from the desk to take it. Her voice dropped. "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand the implications. No, I haven't made contact with the passenger yet. I will immediately." She hung up and walked back, not to the agent, to Lena. Her tone was different now, lower, measured, respectful in a way it hadn't been 10 minutes earlier. "Ms. Brooks, we're going to need a moment to review something." Lena looked at her, calm, steady. "Okay." Inside the terminal, word spread faster than any announcement. "Did you hear? A jet just blocked Echo. That's a restricted lane. That shuts down half the West Runway access." What kind of jet? No idea. But it's not commercial. People started looking around, not at the screens, at Lena. Like the story had suddenly changed genre. Within minutes, operations issued a ground delay, not for one flight, for an entire cluster. Pilots were told to hold, taxiing aircraft were rerouted, fuel schedules shifted, crew rotations paused, all because one aircraft was not moving. And it was not moving on purpose. Inside Aero West headquarters, a red priority alert appeared. Not under customer service, not under complaints, under operational risk. The kind that wakes executives up. Back at the gate, the supervisor leaned in again. "Ms. Brooks, can I see your documents?" Lena handed over the folder. No rush, no triumph, just precision. This time the supervisor read every line. The QR code scanned clean. The authorization was valid. The special handling note had been logged 3 days earlier. Everything was correct, which meant something else was wrong. The supervisor straightened. "I'm going to ask you to wait right here." She turned to the agent. "Do not touch this reservation." The agent nodded too quickly. Lena watched the crowd react, confusion turning into curiosity, curiosity turning into awareness. They were no longer watching a girl being delayed. They were watching a system being interrupted. Outside, the white jet sat perfectly still. Inside, every layer of authority started waking up. Station director, regional operations, corporate risk management. And somewhere between those calls, a name was said. Ethan Brooks, advisor, systems consultant, FAA liaison. The kind of person you don't argue with. Not because he shouts, but because when he speaks, airports stop moving. Lena didn't know any of this yet. She only felt the air change, like the weight had shifted, like something much larger than her had just leaned forward. And suddenly, this wasn't a story about a violin at a gate anymore. It was a story about what happens when quiet preparation meets real leverage. Within minutes, Aero West stopped treating this like a customer service hiccup. They started treating it like what it really was: a risk. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody likes to say out loud. Systems don't move because you're right. Systems move when it becomes dangerous to ignore you. Lena had done everything they claim they want. She had the paperwork. She had the confirmation. She had the QR code. She had the calm voice, the polite tone, the yes ma'am and no sir. She had the truth. And it still didn't matter at gate C-17. Why? Because at the gate, the person behind the counter isn't paid to be fair. They're paid to keep the line moving. They don't ask, what's morally right? They ask, what's the fastest way to make this go away? That's why the supervisor didn't take Lena's folder the first time, not because she thought it was fake, because reading it would make it real. And once it's real, she has to do something about it. She has to take a risk. And most people in systems are trained to do the opposite: avoid risk, reduce liability, protect the schedule, protect the metrics, protect yourself. So they default to the safest story. Policy says no. Passenger is causing delay. Instrument needs a seat. It's neat, it's clean, it's defensible. And it conveniently makes the problem not them. That's the part that should make you angry. Not just that they doubted Lena, but that they didn't even need to doubt her. They just needed her to be inconvenient. Because the gate is the lowest level of power with the highest level of pressure. That agent can't change the rules, he can only enforce them. That supervisor can't rewrite policy, she can only interpret it in the most self-protective way possible. So when a VIP feels uncomfortable, the system translates it into a language it understands. Not prejudice, not bias, but security concern, non-compliance, potential disruption. Words that sound objective, words that protect the company. And once those words enter the system, truth starts to lose its weight. This is why Lena's documents weren't enough, because documents prove you're right. They don't prove you're dangerous to ignore. Back in the terminal, you could see the hierarchy of urgency forming in real time. At first, it was just a gate issue. Then it became a station director issue. Then it became an operations issue. Then it became a runway access issue. Because the second that aircraft stopped on taxiway Echo, the problem didn't belong to customer service anymore. It belonged to everyone. Pilots started calling in. Tower, confirmed delay. Ground crews started stacking. Do we hold pushback? Dispatch started recalculating routes. Can we reroute westbound departures? And the most important thing happened. The cost started climbing. Every minute on the ground burns money. Fuel, crew time, missed connections, gate conflicts, compensation triggers. A domino line of chaos that spreads faster than any apology ever could. And that's when the system finally does what it always does when the price gets high enough. It wakes up. Not because Lena's dream mattered, not because Aurora was priceless, not because a 17-year-old girl deserved dignity, but because the risk had reached a level where ignoring her was no longer safe. That's the brutal mechanism. Power doesn't run on morality. It runs on thresholds. As long as the fallout stays small, the system can afford to be cold. It can afford to dismiss you. It can afford to label you the problem and move on. But the moment the fallout threatens schedules, contracts, federal oversight, reputational damage, now you're not a passenger issue. You're an operational event, and that shift changes everything. That's why, all of a sudden, the same folder they wouldn't touch became the most important piece of paper in the building. That's why the supervisor's tone changed. That's why the station director suddenly wanted names, timestamps, screenshots, reports. Because now the question wasn't, is Lena right? The question was, how big can this get? And in that moment, the audience realizes the real twist. Lena didn't win at the gate. She didn't win because she begged harder. She didn't win because she proved she was good. She won because the system finally saw the danger of staying wrong. And once you understand that, you stop being surprised by how fast policy becomes flexible. You start recognizing it. The rules didn't change because truth walked in. They changed because risk did. Now, pause the story for a second, because everything you just watched only happened for one reason. There was a call, and there was someone powerful enough on the other end of it. So ask yourself the uncomfortable question, what if there wasn't? What if Lena never pulled out her phone? What if Ethan Brooks was just another name in her contacts, not a lever? What if that call went unanswered, or never existed at all? Then this story doesn't end with a runway stopping. It ends with a boarding pass expiring. It ends with a quiet, missed flight notice printed on thin white paper. It ends with Lena standing at a service counter, holding her violin case, being told to file a report and wait for a response. That's it. No apology, no reversal, no system waking up. Just paperwork. In that version of the story, the supervisor doesn't read the folder. The station director never gets involved. Taxiway Echo stays open. The airport never even notices her. Lena becomes another entry in a database. Passenger dispute, instrument compliance issue, non-urgent. And she carries something far heavier than a missed flight. She carries a label: difficult, uncooperative, potentially disruptive. Those words don't stay at the airport. They follow you. They live in records, in internal notes, in quiet system memory. The next time she travels, the agent looks twice. The next time she asks a question, it's heard as resistance. The next time she explains herself, it sounds like justification. And slowly, something dangerous happens. She starts to believe them. She starts wondering if she really was the problem, if she asked for too much, if protecting her instrument was selfish, if staying quiet would be safer next time. That's how systems break people. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, through repetition, through silence, through policy. In that version of the story, Lena doesn't miss just a flight. She misses an audition. And auditions don't come with second chances. That violin she carried across states, the hours of practice before sunrise, the competitions, the sacrifices, they don't vanish dramatically. They fade. And that's worse, because nobody feels responsible. Karen finishes her drink. Rachel finishes her shift. The gate closes on time. And Lena learns the quiet lesson millions of people learn every year: that being right is not the same as being protected, that fairness is not automatic, that dignity is conditional, that if you don't have leverage, your truth can be ignored without consequence. And that lesson changes people. It makes them smaller, quieter, more careful. It teaches them to avoid attention instead of demanding respect. It teaches them to apologize even when they didn't do anything wrong. It teaches them to shrink. And that's the version of this story most people know. Because most people don't have an Ethan Brooks in their phone. They don't have access to a control tower. They don't have a way to turn unfair into operational risk. They only have themselves, their voice, their paperwork, their calm. And too often, that's not enough. So when people watch Lena's story and say, "She was lucky," they're not wrong. She was. Not lucky because she had a powerful father. Lucky because her truth had backup. Lucky because the system had to listen. But millions of people tell the truth every day without that backup. They file complaints, they submit forms, they write emails that never get answered. And eventually, they stop trying. Because nothing is more exhausting than being right in a world that rewards power, not justice. So this part of the story isn't meant to make you feel hopeful. It's meant to make you honest. About how rare that call is. About how fragile fairness really is. About how many stories end quietly, without anyone ever knowing. Lena's victory is real, but so is the shadow behind it. Because for every Lena who gets rescued by leverage, there are thousands who are told to move along. And they do. Not because they were wrong, but because the system never had to care. The most dangerous thing Lena did that day wasn't making the call. It was staying calm before it. Because in moments like that, everything inside you is screaming to react, to defend yourself, to raise your voice, to prove you're not weak. But Lena didn't do any of that. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't perform her innocence. She stood still. And that wasn't passivity. That was control. Most people think calm means you don't care. In reality, calm means you care so much that you refuse to let your emotions destroy your position. In psychology, they call it self-regulation under threat. The ability to keep your nervous system from hijacking your credibility. Because the moment you lose control, the story changes. You're no longer a person being wronged. You become difficult, unstable, escalating, and systems love those words. They use them to erase you. Lena didn't give them that gift. She spoke slowly. She held her posture. She kept her hands visible. She answered questions directly, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something most adults never learn. Emotion gives you relief. Discipline gives you power. That's why her documents still mattered. That's why her tone stayed clean. That's why no one could rewrite her into a threat. She didn't fight the stereotype. She starved it. And that is a form of strength people rarely talk about. Because calm doesn't look heroic. It doesn't trend. It doesn't feel satisfying. But calm protects your future. When the supervisor reviewed her paperwork, there was no footage of Lena yelling, no audio of her losing control, no moment that could be clipped, reframed, or weaponized. Just a quiet record of someone who stayed consistent. That's what preserved her credibility when power finally showed up. And this is where the story shifts from revenge to lesson. Ethan Brooks didn't win because he was louder. He won because Lena had protected the moral high ground. She didn't poison the case with chaos. She didn't let emotion become evidence against her. So when the system finally had to look, it saw clarity, not conflict. That's why calm is dangerous to biased systems. Because bias feeds on noise, on reaction, on disruption. Calm leaves nothing for prejudice to grab onto. It forces people to deal with facts. And facts are harder to dismiss when the person presenting them isn't shaking. This is why people say, "I wish I could stay calm like that." But calm isn't a personality trait. It's a strategy. It's trained. It's practiced. It's chosen. Lena didn't become calm in that moment. She arrived calm because someone had taught her that her dignity was not negotiable. That she didn't have to perform panic to be believed. That she didn't have to beg to be respected. And that lesson changed everything. Because when power entered the story, it didn't rescue chaos. It reinforced order. That's the part people miss. Ethan didn't override the system with anger. He aligned with the truth Lena had protected. She didn't collapse into him. She stood beside him. And that's the difference between being saved and being supported. Calm doesn't mean submission. It means you are not giving your opponent the emotional weapon they're waiting for. In high-pressure situations, losing control feels human. But staying in control is what keeps your story intact. It keeps your identity clean. It keeps your evidence usable. It keeps your future uncorrupted. And that matters long after the moment passes. Because most of us won't have an Ethan Brooks to call. We won't have a taxiway to block. We won't have a system forced to wake up. But we will have our composure. And that is not small. That is how you survive without shrinking. That is how you protect yourself when power isn't on your side. Not by becoming louder, but by becoming unbreakable. Calm is not weakness. Calm is what keeps your truth from being rewritten. Calm is what turns dignity into something permanent. And that's why Lena didn't just win the situation. She preserved herself. This is the part where most people lean back and smile, because it feels good when power shows up and the wrong side suddenly starts sweating. It feels like justice. It feels like balance. It feels like, finally, someone gets what they deserve. But there's a question hiding inside that feeling, a dangerous one. Are we cheering for justice? Or are we just enjoying revenge that looks clean? Because the line between the two is thinner than people think. Justice is supposed to stop harm. Revenge is supposed to spread it. Justice says, "This can't happen again." Revenge says, "I want you to hurt the way I hurt." And if we're not careful, we start calling revenge accountability because it sounds nicer. Back in the terminal, after the phones started ringing and taxiway echo became the center of the airport's attention, Aero West went into damage control mode. They pulled people aside. They started collecting statements. They asked for timestamps. They asked for video. And then the internet did what the internet always does when it smells a story like this. It picked a villain. It didn't want policy fixes. It wanted a face, a name, an address, a consequence that hurts. People started posting, "Fire her, ban her, make her lose everything." And some people went further. They wanted to destroy Diane Harper's life. They wanted to ruin Rachel Moore's career. They wanted their kids harassed, their homes exposed, their shame broadcast. And that's where you have to stop and ask, is that justice? Or is that a crowd taking a moral excuse and turning it into a weapon? Because the truth is, you can punish a person and still keep a broken system intact. You can ruin one gate agent's life and still have the same bias at the next gate tomorrow. That's not justice. That's substitution, a sacrifice to make everyone feel better. Real justice is harder. It's slower. It's less satisfying in the moment. Because it doesn't just demand pain. It demands change. If Ethan Brooks wanted revenge, he could have crushed individuals. He had the leverage. He could have made calls that ended careers in a day. He could have made sure names were blacklisted, not just passengers. But that's not what a principled person does. A principled person targets the machine, not just the hands stuck inside it. So instead of going for maximum humiliation, Ethan went for maximum correction. He demanded an internal review with oversight. He demanded retraining, real training, not a slideshow people click through. He demanded a formal instrument handling protocol that couldn't be interpreted at the gate. He demanded a policy that protects the next Lena who doesn't have his number. Because that's what justice is. Justice doesn't say, "Make them suffer." Justice says, "Make sure it can't happen again." And here's the hard part. That means you have to resist the easy dopamine of revenge. You have to resist the part of you that wants to watch someone get publicly destroyed and call it fairness. Because public destruction doesn't fix prejudice. It just changes who is holding the power for a moment. And if you're honest, that's what people crave. Not justice, control. They want the feeling of being the one who decides who deserves pain. But the moment we become comfortable with that, we start looking like the very system we're angry at. Lena understood this before most of the adults did. When she finally got a quiet moment, away from the gate, away from the crowd, away from Diane's satisfied stare, she asked her father something that didn't sound like a victory lap. "Are they going to lose everything?" That question matters, because it proves her dignity wasn't built on cruelty. She didn't want blood. She wanted respect. And that's the difference between a person who's been trained in character and a person who's been trained in bitterness. So yes, let the system feel consequences. Let policies change. Let bias get exposed. Let people be held responsible when they abuse their role. But don't confuse responsibility with ruin. Justice repairs. Revenge replaces. Justice makes the world safer for the next person. Revenge just makes today feel satisfying. And if all we do is trade humiliation back and forth, then nothing really changes. Just the direction of the pain. Dignity is not something you beg for at a gate counter. It's not something you negotiate with a clipboard, and it's definitely not something a system gives you out of kindness. Dignity is something you protect with clarity, with evidence, and with the right leverage at the right level. That's what Lena's story really teaches. Not that power always wins, not that money fixes everything, but that calm, strategy, and proof can move even the most rigid systems. Because when Lena stood there, holding her violin, she wasn't fighting to be special. She was fighting to be treated as normal, to be seen as human, to be believed without having to perform pain. And that's something millions of people quietly fight for every day. In hospitals, at courtrooms, at border checkpoints, at job interviews, at school offices. Anywhere procedure becomes an excuse to ignore common sense. What saved Lena wasn't shouting, it wasn't rage, it wasn't humiliation. It was preparation. She had her documents, she had her calm, and through her father, she had access to the layer of power that systems actually respond to. That doesn't make the story unfair, it makes it honest. Because systems don't move for emotion, they move for risk. They move when consequences become measurable. They move when silence becomes expensive. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need a billionaire father to learn the lesson. You need the mindset. Calm is not weakness, it is signal control. Evidence is not paperwork, it is leverage in waiting. And strategy is not manipulation, it is respect for reality. When Lena stayed composed, she protected her credibility. When her father escalated correctly, he protected her future. Neither of them begged, neither of them panicked. Neither of them played the role the system expected, emotional, reactive, messy. They stayed precise. And precision is terrifying to broken systems, because precision can't be dismissed. So if there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this. Your dignity is not proven by how loud you fight. It's proven by how steadily you stand, by how clearly you document, by how wisely you choose where to apply pressure. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't confrontation, it's control. And now, here's where the story turns toward you. Because at some point, almost everyone watching this has stood in front of a gate. Maybe not an airport gate, but a gate of permission, a gate of authority, a gate of power. Where someone looked at you and decided, without evidence, that you were complicated, that you were difficult, that you were a problem. And you had two choices: explode or endure. Some of you exploded. Some of you swallowed it. Some of you walked away with scars no one else could see. So here's the real question. What did you learn from that moment? Did it teach you to harden, to distrust, to give up? Or did it quietly teach you to prepare better, to document more carefully, to speak more precisely, to choose battles with intention? Because dignity isn't about winning every fight. It's about not letting the wrong fight define you. And power isn't about domination. It's about positioning. Lena didn't defeat a system. She exposed it. She didn't humiliate it. She forced it to become accountable. That's the difference. So before you leave this story, ask yourself, where in your life have you been pushed by procedure when the truth was obvious? Where were you told, that's just how it works, when it clearly wasn't fair? And what would it look like to face that moment again with calm instead of fear, with preparation instead of panic, with strategy instead of surrender? Because dignity doesn't live at the gate. It lives in how you prepare long before you get there. And if you've ever been on the wrong side of a system, If you've ever been quietly labeled a problem for simply existing, share your story. Not to relive the pain, but to remind others they weren't weak. They were navigating something that was never built to be gentle. And the more we tell those stories, the harder it becomes for silence to pretend it's innocent.